Hello and welcome back to CST 2120. In this lecture I'm going to cover building web services with Express. So in previous lectures I've covered Node.js, which is a way in which you can run JavaScript without a browser, and the Node Package Manager, which is a way in which you can install third-party libraries that can work with Node.js. I've also covered HTTP, different methods like get, post, put, delete, and explained what a web service is, where we're sending HTTP requests to the server and we're getting back the data in JSON format. In this lecture I'm going to explain how you can build your own web service using a Node.js module that's called Express. So if you remember from a previous lecture, what a web service does effectively is you have a server that listens on a particular port, such as 8080. The server receives an HTTP request, such as get, put, these are the methods, right? Get, put, post, delete, and so on and so forth. Then the server will look for the path that's the request been sent to. It'll extract the query string, like these key value pairs, at the end of the URL. It'll decide, the query string is used for get, or perhaps the server will extract the data from the body of the message. That's the case where we're using post or put methods. Then the server will query the database if we're requesting, certain kind of data. Then it'll put that data into JSON format and send it back to the client. That's effectively what a web service does. And a lot of this stuff we'll do by writing code that uses Express to handle, most of the kind of server sort of stuff. And then later I'll explain how we can use Node.js to query the database that we're using in this module, which is called MongoDB. So I'm going to start introducing Express, show you some very basic Express usage. Then I'm going to explain how we can use JavaScript to extract the query string, the path, and the message body. These are the things that we need in order to be able to handle the request effectively. Then I'm going to talk about how we can serve up the static files using Express. Static files are like, the HTML files, CSS files, images, and so on and so forth. And finally, I'm going to just sort of wrap it all up together into a single sort of, very simple kind of cat web service. Okay, so let's start with Express. So it's very common. It's a web server, and it's very commonly used with kind of Node.js and MongoDB. So there's this idea of the kind of the LAMP stack, which is like Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, which is used for web development for about 10 years or so, and then it sort of fell out of favor a little bit, partly because not everyone likes PHP, including myself, and then people sort of moved over to what are called the mean stack, which is Mongo, MongoDB, Angular, Node, mean, and MongoDB, Express, MongoDB, Express, Angular, and Node. So not really covering Angular in this module, but we are covering MongoDB, Node, and Express. So it's sort of fairly easy to use web server, very easy to sort of install and use with Node and NPM. It's very powerful, pretty much anything you need from web servers covered in Express, and it has lots of sort of plugins to support different types of functionality. So we install this using NPM, and just sort of as an aside, okay, so we've kind of gone from the LAMP stack to the mean stack. Kind of now we're kind of moving much more towards kind of cloud kind of hosting of stuff and serverless applications, all this kind of stuff, which is covered in my third year module. So it's really easy to install Express. It works like any other Node module. You just need to initialize the folder using npm init. Then we type npm install Express, and this should put the Express module in the Node modules folder of your workspace. Now these examples that I'm giving you in this lecture, we're using the kind of more modern import method rather than require, which means we need to set type to module in package.json, which again was explained in the lecture on Node. So I'll do all this again just to remind you and show you how you can install Express. Okay, so I'm just going to do it all within Visual Studio Code. So what I'm going to do, because I've already got all this set up for my demos, I'm going to create another folder called call it demo or something. So at the moment, demo is not initialized as a kind of Node project. So we'll open up the terminal. Let's just clear all this for the moment. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll go to demo. Nothing in there at the moment. Then we do npm init. Okay, and it'll ask us a bunch of questions that for the moment we can just ignore. If we release it, producing like a module that we wanted to release on the Node sort of Node modules list kind of thing that other people could install, then this would all matter. Here it doesn't really matter. So here we've now got package.json, and then we can do npm install Express, So pretty easy, right? And then it's download it. It's got a big package. And now it's installed it, yeah? So now if we look inside demo, we have the Node modules folder, which contains, Express and all the various complicated dependencies it has, as well as package JSON. And if I wanted to make this run the examples in this lecture, then I need to set type to module, yeah? So I'd save that, and now this sort of demo folder, which I'm not going to use anymore, it's just there for demo purposes, is now set up, ready to run the examples that I'm going to give you in this lecture. Right, so let's just get going with some real code that uses Express, yeah? So here's my little sort of Hello World Express server, and you can see in, I don't know, 10, 15 lines of code, I've got a server up and running that's listening on a particular path and handling get requests sent to that path, yeah? And this could be shorter than it is. I'm just trying to show everything as much detail as possible, yeah? So first thing we need to do, whenever we use a third-party module with Node, we need to import the third-party module we're going to use, in this case Express. Now Express, what you get as the default export from the Express module is actually a function. So we need to call that function to return, what I'm calling an app here, or server, whatever you want to call it. So we need to execute that function by putting the smooth braces around it. That returns this app object, or whatever you want to call it. And it's that app object that we use to kind of set up the paths and do all the stuff we need to do with Express, yeah? Now I've done this longhand. Later I'll just use anonymous functions for this, but just to make it extremely clear what we're doing, I'm defining it longhand here. So I'm creating a function here that will handle get requests. So I've called it handle get requests. And any of these functions that we set up to handle requests, get, post, put, delete, and so on and so forth, will have two objects in them, yeah? A request object that has all the information about the HTTP request, like the headers, query parameters, path, and so on and so forth. And then it also has a response object, and we use the response object to send back the response to the client, yeah? And you kind of need to, so the loop is, this: you get the request coming in, we get what we need out of the request object, handle a request, and then we send back a response. If we don't send back a response, the server will be kind of left hanging and the page will never finish loading because it's sent a request but hasn't got anything back, yeah? So we always need to send back a response when we're using any kind of web server, yeah? So we have set up our function here, which is extremely simple. It's just going to send hello world. And then we set up, then using the Express methods, we can set up, if we do app.get, what we're specifying here is both the path and the handler for that request, yeah? So get here is the HTTP method. I'll show you how to set up a post one. It's very easy, right? So app.get, we pass in the path we want to listen on and the function that we want to handle HTTP requests sent to that path, yeah? In this case, I've got a separate function, but as I'll show you later, we normally just put an anonymous function in here, yeah? Then all we do is app.listen on the port and specify the port we want to listen on. If it won't listen on that port and there might be a port conflict, just try a slightly different port like 8081, something like that. And I've just got a bit of login information just so I know it's running, yeah? So you can see in terms of the Express code to get this web application running, we've kind of got that stuff, like 1, 2 lines, 3 lines, assuming that's an anonymous function, 4 lines. So 4 lines of code, and we've got our Express server running. So it's really pretty simple, to use initially, but as you'll see later, we can do lots of different stuff with it. It'll handle session management and all this kind of stuff. So here's my Hello World Express server. So when you go to localhost 8080 and just the kind of root of the application, it sends the Hello World message, and that's what we're seeing in the browser there, yeah? So let's do a little demo. Okay, so I'll go to the ones I'm using here. I've got obviously written a bunch of examples, hello world. So this is the code we just looked at here, yeah? And then let's go up a directory, and then to run it, we just type node, hello world, express. It's listing on a particular port, and then we go to the browser, wherever that's gone. Okay, so localhost 8080, this is a later example. And then we go to that port, go to that path, sorry, and we get the hello world message. We put some other path in there. It doesn't give us anything because Express isn't listening on that path for get requests. It's only currently listening at the root of the application. Now, we've got options here with Express. So you remember there's lots of different HTTP methods, get, post, put, delete, and so on and so forth. And obviously we've got lots of different paths, all possible paths that we can imagine, really, yeah? So what Express can do, we can set it to listen for different HTTP methods on the same path, or it can listen for the same HTTP methods sent to different paths. Obviously, it can't listen simultaneously to different. It can't have multiple handlers for get sent to the root of the application. You know, it can only listen. You can only have one method. Each method, you can have multiple methods for the same path, but you can't have two methods that are the same on the same path, right? I think it's pretty logical here. So here we've now here I've shifted to anonymous functions. Yeah, so it's the same boilerplate kind of code at the top. You can just sort of ignore that from now on. Yeah, as long as you've got it in your code. Now I've got an anonymous function here, like lambda function. Here you've got the request response object, and that's pointing to this function here. Yeah. So here I'm setting up app get to the path like the root of the application, just like I did in my hello world one. And then I've added a second path. So when I send app get receive, when it receives an app get HTTP message to the kitty path, then instead of saying hello world, it'll say hello kitty. Okay. So we're setting up different paths, and those different paths will have different responses in this case. Yeah. So here, when we're sending, just as I showed you before, to HTTP localhost, you know, just slash or no slash at all, we're getting hello world returned. That's that bit there. Yeah. And then if we send localhost 8080 to kitty, the kitty path, then it echoes hello kitty. Yeah. And that's the where are we at? Oh, sorry, yeah. And then it says hello kitty. I'm not even bother demoing this. I think it's pretty easy, yeah. Now remember, we can set up the same path for different HTTP methods, and that's what we're kind of doing here, yeah. So I can send an app.get to kitty, but I can also set up an app.post.kitty. There's no conflict because they're different HTTP methods, and therefore we have different handlers for those different when those different situations occur, yeah. So in this case, when I send an app get to kitty, all I'm responding back is get kitty. And when I do app.post to kitty, then it sends post kitty. Yeah. So same path, different methods in this case. Yeah. So when I send a get request to kitty, which I can just do easily in the browser, then I get kind of get kitty. Now remember, post requests I can't send in the browser without a form or without the AJAX code, which will come later. So I have to test my post requests using Postman. Obviously I could test the get request as well, but I'm just illustrating this here. So if I send a post request to kitty, and then you can see at the bottom here, it's sending back post kitty as the response. Yeah. Same path, different HTTP methods. Now we can also listen to all the subpaths of a particular path, and that can be handy if we're using the path to kind of send in sort of IDs of products or some stuff like that. Yeah. So in this case, we just put /star at the end of a path, and then in this case, what this is doing when it sends app get to kitty /star, it's going to any kind of combination of paths following the kitty slash will be listened to by this particular method. Yeah, be handled by this particular anonymous function. Okay, and we'll come to that in a little bit because I'll use this to illustrate something a little bit later. Okay, so we can now listen on different paths for different incoming HTTP requests with different methods. Okay, so that's one of the foundations of being able to write a functional web service. Now the second thing we need to do is to handle this additional data that's being sent in an HTTP request. Yeah, so with an HTTP request, we might include a query string. We might specify sort of more complicated path, which can handle using wildcards. And then we also, with a post or put, we might put some data inside the message body that the server also has to use in order to process that request and send back the appropriate data to the client. Yeah. So we need the path. So the server needs to know the path, the query string parameters, and the data in the body of the message. And all this data is inside the request object, so it's pretty easy to extract and use. Yeah, so it's all very sort of well defined. So if you're ever curious about this request object, just do console log request, and you'll see it's like a massive thing with the headers and all the complicated stuff that you might possibly need in order to be able to handle requests from the client. So request.path will give us the path that's been sent to the server, and the query parameters inside request query. So the query parameters are a set of key values. Standard request query is a JavaScript object where the key is like the name of the query parameter and the value is the value of the query parameter. And I'll show you with a little example which will hopefully make it clearer. Yeah. So in this code, what I'm doing is I'm outputting the path that's been sent to the server, and here, remember, I'm listening on /star, so I can send any kind of paths I like, right? Because obviously we're specifying some of the path here when we set up the handler initially, but here the path could have all kinds of complicated stuff after Kitty, and can process it in this particular handler, yeah? And then the query parameters, query object is a set of keys and values containing all of the query parameters here. So what I'm doing here, I'm just working through request query and outputting all the keys and all the values, yeah? So let's have a little demo of that, yeah? Okay, so here I've got my path query parameters, so let's stop that. Node path query parameters, okay, so that's running. And then I'm going to actually do this. I don't know, I've got these two things up here, but never mind, yeah. Let's just move that here so we can see what's coming out, yeah. So if I do localhost.8080/kitty, let's start with that, yeah. I think I might need that because I've got the thing after. Then it's saying get kitty, and it's saying here the path kitty, and there's no query parameters, yeah. Now, if I had a more complicated path like kitty Sunday, let's say kitty food Sunday, for example, you can see here it's pulling out. It's got all that complete path is kind of available to the web server, and it's outputting it there. And if I wanted, you know, a particular kitty with an ID of 7 or something, then I could, or 9 in this case, then you can see here all I have to do is take out the end bit of the path, and then I can use that in my code, for example, for a database query, yeah? Now, next thing we've got is the query parameters. So we might say food, I don't know, I'm struggling to think of examples here, food equals meat, and day equals Tuesday, for example, and month equals March, right? So I've got a whole bunch of kind of query parameters going at the end of this request here. And if I press return, you can see here the code here is working through the query object and outputting the key here, which is food, day, month, and the values are meat, Tuesday, and March, yeah? So we go back to the example. So food, meat, day, Tuesday, month, March, yeah? And so we often use this, for example, for pagination. You'll often see websites where you're passing in page number and number of pages and all this kind of stuff in the query. Sorry, page number it'll be, and offset, or, you know, yeah, that kind of stuff. I'm going to cover that bit in my third year, and that might be useful in some of your projects. Or with search, for example, you know, that often when we have a search path, we'll use the query parameter to specify the search term, yeah? So very common kind of with GET requests, yeah? So here, I've shown you how here to get out this data and how to get out this data, which we need in order to be able to handle the request effectively, yeah? Yeah, so if we were building a web service, we might use these path and query parameters to control the service that we're delivering to the user, yeah? So you might want get cats search name equals Bob to return a search for cats that are named Bob, for example. Or if we do post to cats, remember we can set up different HTTP methods to the same path. Then we could create a post to cats, could create a new cat with data in the message body. Remember, post is idempotent. No, sorry, it's not idempotent. So if I call post cats with the same data 5 times, it'll create 5 different cats in my database, yeah? Whereas put, in theory, will only create 1 cat with that name and, you know, whatever values I've got for that cat. So we can, using this, you know, this query parameters and path, we're basically fine-tuning, we're determining the functionality of the web service and what data is returned by it. The other really important thing that the server needs to access is the data in the message body, right? Now, we can send data to the server in lots of different formats. It can handle files, XML, JSON, all kinds of form data, and so on and so forth, yeah? But for coursework 2, I've specified that you must use data in JSON format, yeah? And that means we have to add an extra module that Express will then use in order to be able to read the body and turn it into JSON format, yeah? So it's really easy to use. You just install body parser with npm, and you can just use it in your code, yeah? So here we got, so just in the same way we installed Express, I'm not going to bother demoing that, we can install body parser, and then body parser, and then the default export from body parser is this, I've just called body parser in this case, and then we can body parser JSON, will return, I'm not even sure what it returns, some kind of object-y thing, I suppose, and then app.use is the way in which we link Express to this body parser module, yeah? In this case, so we're enabling Express to be able to process JSON data. And then what we can do, then once we've set up Express to be able to read JSON formatted data from the body of the message, then we can do the request body will contain the body of the message, and it'll be in, and if I send it in JSON, it'll be available in JSON. Yeah. So what I've got here is I'm just outputting the contents of the message sent to the server, and this is a post request here. So whenever I post a kitty, I can then extract the body of the message that's been sent to the server. I'm just logging out here for the moment. Yeah. And again, always send back a response. Otherwise, the server will be hanging, the page website will be hanging, and it'll think that it hasn't received a response. Yeah, so we always need to use response send at the end. Yeah. So let's just show you how that works. Yeah. So let's go back to my code. It's express post. This is the code here, right? So let's do node express post. Now remember, I can't test this post within the browser without a form or a bit of JavaScript code. So I'm going to do the very sensible thing, right, and test it using Postman. So I've actually got an example here already, right? So in fact, I'll start up a new tab just so you can see how it works here. So we've got post. Now remember the URL is, I'm not going to say myself typing at least, so it's localhost 8080/kitty, because I've set it up to listen on the kitty path here. Now with Postman, you have to specify, we can specify all kinds of stuff with Postman, like body, headers, authentication, all this kind of stuff. Here we're focusing on the body. Now we need to get JSON formatted data into the body. We need to specify raw JSON. Okay, then we're sure that it's going to be JSON. I'm not entirely sure how much. This probably sets up headers actually that are being sent to the server. And then we've set up to raw JSON. Okay, and now we can put in our JSON. So if we've got name, I don't know, there's got a lot of cats called Bob. And we can send some data basically. Age, remember it has to be in JSON format. Yeah. That's all the quotation marks. Age, I don't know, Bob is 10, let's say, yeah? Okay. So here we've got the data in the body of the message. Then we send that to the server. And then we get back from the server data received, which is this message here, yeah? And look on the command line here. I'm console logging out what's been sent to the server. In this case, we've got name, Bob, and age 10 has been sent back. And I think it's already processed it into a JavaScript object. So the next thing I want to cover is how we serve up static files from the server. Yeah. So by static files, I mean files that basically are sort of saved. They've been created by the developers, and they're not changed by the server, but they need to be loaded by the browser in order to view the website. Yeah. So in your coursework 2, you're going to have a single index HTML file, right? But also some CSS to style that. Also some JavaScript code, right? That's all bunch of lines of code saved in a file called with the extension JS, and typically you have a bunch of images, and maybe you've got some other things as well. These are just a collection of things that need to be received by the browser in order to load the page. Yeah. So really, we're focusing here on Express as like a web service, but we also need a browser. We need a front end for this project, and that front end that will then talk to the web service using Ajax. Yeah. And in order to have the front end at all, we need index HTML, style, images, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So what we need to do, we need to configure Express to serve these files from a directory that we choose. Yeah. And the sort of common one that people use is they create a public directory, because again, all the files within public will be public and available. So we just need this single line of code. We do app.use, express.static public, and then that'll set everything up, so miraculously we can access all of the files at the same URL as our web service. And that's a really important point, which I'm going to come to in a little bit. Yeah. So I'll show you how to do it. Okay, so let's go back here. So I think it's clear enough, right? This is my sort of file, whatever, folder, whatever. Yeah, got my node modules here, which we're going to ignore. And what I've got here is called a public folder containing my images, index.html, which is just a picture of a cat, and a styles file as well. Yeah. So this public folder is what I'm going to set Express up to serve up at the root of the application. Yeah. So let's just look at my example. So here I'm saying that the public folder, this public folder here, obviously I could give it a different name, will be served up. Everything inside it will be I can access from the root of the URL. Yeah. So let's run this and you'll see what I mean. Yeah. So node Express, sorry, static files, isn't it? Okay, so that's running up and running. Now let's go to our browser. Yeah. And if we just go to, so obviously the web service won't work anymore because I've got rid of all those paths in this thing, but at the root of the application, it's going to load up index.html by default, right? So if I type, this is effectively doing, remember that index.html is the default page that's loaded. So what this is doing is loading up index.html and showing us, the cat website, yeah? And I think it's called styles CSS. That's the styles file. And also I can probably directly access the image file as well, if I can remember what it's called, probably cat. Images cat JPEG, yeah? So probably this will work. So if we do images cat JPEG, there's the cat, right? So all of those files that are in the public folder, they all appear at the root just after the port number in this case, yeah? Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. Now you must use this approach when you're building your coursework too, yeah? So all the files for your website must be served by Express. So the reason for this is that there's this kind of cross-origin resource sharing sort of rules, basically, that JavaScript that's running in the browser must be served up from the same domain as the web service that it's talking to, unless the web service is configured to receive kind of cross-origin resources, yeah? It's a sort of security restriction, which can be a little tricky to work with sometimes, yeah? But you don't have to worry about that here. I might cover it in a Q&A session or something, how to use CORS with your web service. But if you do in a sort of simple implementation, the way around CORS problems is to just serve up the JavaScript from the same domain as the web service, yeah? So if you're serving it up, so if your URL here, where you're serving up your index.html and all the rest of it, is the same URL as, Kitty and all this kind of stuff, then you'll have no problems. The JavaScript running in the browser will be able to talk to the web service, yeah? But if your URL is, running from the file system or the live server or something like that, then it won't be able to talk to the web service, and then you're going to, run into problems and you're going to get weird CORS errors, and when you try and use Ajax, it's just not going to work, yeah? So Express you must use this Express static approach to serve up all the files for your website, yeah? Otherwise, your JavaScript will not be able to talk to your web service, yeah? So don't use live server in VS Code for coursework 2, except maybe for doing the front end or something. But when you get to the web service part, don't use live server, and don't just double click on the HTML file in File Explorer, yeah? So if your URL looks like that, this is a live server URL, your JavaScript running in the browser would not be able to talk to your web service, yeah? So that's not going to work. And if you serve it up from the file system by double clicking on the file instead of serving it up from Express, again, the JavaScript running in the browser won't be able to talk to the web service, and you'll get a CORS error, yeah? And so that's not going to work either, yeah? What you need to do, like I said, is use Express, .use, app.use, Express static, and specify a folder where all of your HTML files are. Then you'll be able to see your website at the same URL as the web service, and then the JavaScript will be able to talk to the web service, and everything will work brilliantly, yeah? So please do that. Otherwise, we're going to have to help you fix it, and the way to fix it I've kind of explained already, yeah? Okay, so I think we've covered enough of the basics. I mean, I'm not going to show you anything massively advanced here, but I just wanted to put it together into a kind of basic sort of web service with a couple of, methods and a couple of paths, yeah? So this is my kind of cat web service, Not actually such a cat fan myself, but I find them quite good examples, yeah? Okay, so we're going to put it all together into a simple web service, yeah? And I've got three methods and paths, yeah? Two methods, sorry, and three method and path combinations, yeah? So get cats will return the details of all the cats in JSON format, and then get cats and search, so search path here, with a certain query parameter called name, will search for cats using the name specified as a query parameter, and post cats will add a new cat with the data in the message body, yeah? Now, this is a lecture on Express, not a lecture on MongoDB, so, a separate lecture will explain how you can use JavaScript to save data and retrieve data to and from MongoDB, yeah? You must use MongoDB in your coursework, but to separate out the sort of different lectures, different functionalities, in this lecture I'm just going to use an array to store the data. In your projects, you should obviously be using MongoDB, yeah? So don't hand in, your sort of entire coursework 2 with an array storing the data. You're going to lose an awful lot of marks if you do that, yeah? because obviously the next time you restart the web server, all of the data will be gone because it's just held in memory. Yeah. So please use MongoDB to store data in coursework 2. The array I'm using here is an example because I'm trying to explain the different functionality in different lectures. Yeah. Later we'll show you how to use JavaScript to talk to MongoDB, no problem. Yeah. So this example, right, of setting up Express in the same way I've explained, and I've got this array just temporarily, to explain it, to hold the data. Yeah. So first thing we want to do is handle post requests, right? So when it receives an HTTP request sent to the cats path, it's basically just going to store the JSON that's been sent in the message body in the cat array. Yeah. And then just acknowledge, again, you always have to do response send to complete the cycle and send and let the client know that the request has been received and processed successfully. Yeah. Then we're going to handle a couple of GET requests, right? So first thing, if you send GET to the cats, GET request to the cats path, it will return all of the cats in JSON format. And then we've got a search path as well, which I thought was, put it all together rather nicely. Remember the search path, it's expecting that there'll be a name query parameter that will have the name of the cat that we're trying to search for. Yeah. So if that query parameter isn't there, we could just return all the cats, or we could just generate an error, which is what I'm doing here. Yeah? And then if we want to search for if we reach this point in the code, we know that we've got the name parameter has been set, name query parameter has been set, and now we can then work our way through the cat array. Obviously, this will be a database search in a real application. And whenever we find a cat that has the request.query.name, we save that, put that into the cat array. Yeah. And then we send back all the cats that we found in JSON format. So let's just show you that. And okay. So it's running. I'm just going to use Postman entirely for this example. So let's just create a new one. Okay, so let's just start with let's set up a tab to do the get. So what is it? HTTP localhost 8080/cats. Yeah. So remember, the get request will send all of the cats. And currently, because it's just an array in memory, the server's just started, we haven't got any cats yet in our memory. Yeah. So now let's add a cat. So let's just save myself a bit of typing here. So remember, we need to put some data in the body of the message, and this will be raw JSON format. Yeah. So let's add a couple of cats here. So name. I know, stick to Bob for the first cat. Age. So Bob's a little bit old, I think. Yeah. So Bob's 12. Yeah. So we're going to send Bob there, yeah, and it's received the data, and maybe Ginger, classic cat names here, yeah, and maybe, I don't know, Tinkers or something, age 12, old cats, and then maybe you can have Tinker's age, I don't know, 11 or something, yeah. So we sent a bunch of data to the server now, yeah, and now when we send a GET request to cats, with a bit of luck, we can see that it's stored in the array, all of these different cats, within the temporary data structure on the server, which we're using purely for illustrative purposes. Yeah. So now we've done that, we know we've got some cats there. We can then run some searches against that data. And so if we send a GET message to GET request to HTTP localhost search, let's just save myself a bit of typing. So here we're sending it to the search path. Now, if we remember we had to have those query parameters. Then we get if we miss the query parameters and send it, remember we had the missing name query parameters. And then if we search for if we set the query parameters, like name equals Ginger, then we're getting back Ginger. And I think we had a Tinkers, didn't we? And then we're getting the cats called, the two cats called Tinkers, I think sort of Tinkerbell Fairy kind of thing here, yeah? Okay, so we got a couple of, so that's returning all of the cats. That's searching for cats, and if we put a name that doesn't exist, then it doesn't return any cats at all. Yeah, so our search cat path's working nicely. We can also get all the cats, and then we can add more cats using the post. Yeah, so obviously you can see that by using different paths, different HTTP methods, we can gradually build up a web service that will support all that we need for our application. Yeah, so and obviously we can talk about that you know, in it, probably talk about in the Q&A about the sorts of paths and HTTP methods that we might want to use for our social networking website. Okay, so Express is a powerful web server, right? It's fully functional, used in an awful lot of web applications, and it works with JavaScript running on Node.js. Yeah. So what we do is we set it up to handle HTTP requests with HTTP methods like get, post, put, delete, and so on that are sent on particular paths. Okay. I've used an array to store the data in this example code, but obviously you need to use MongoDB in your projects, and you must use Express to serve up the static files for your project, or you're going to get a cross-origin request sharing error, which is fixable with a lot of hassle. So just don't bother. Just make sure that you're serving up all the static files from the root of your application. Yeah, and I think that's it.